Hey everybody, welcome back to Keeping It Real with Tiff and Carl. I'm Carl Rabin,
And I am Tiff Salcido.
and we are here today to continue our conversation on effective leadership and compassionate leadership and how to get the best out of your staff and really build their level of you know um, engagement and enjoyment in what it is that they do with their teams and the way that we communicate. And so today we're going to focus on something that is not near and dear to anybody's heart, but definitely something that should be paid attention to and is really important to not, if not embrace, but to fully grasp, right? Which is the difference between a hug and a hold, right? So, and that's conflict, right? So, when you think of the word conflict, Tiff, what do you think of? What first comes to mind?
Well, what first comes to mind is that it's not combat. And this has come from like a long time of learning how to deal with conflict. I think that that word is so loaded. People almost always assume that conflict is going to be like an argument or a disagreement or some kind of fight. And really, when I think of conflict, it's a disagreement. It's a difference in opinions, a difference of perspectives, a difference in values, miscommunication. It usually just means that we're on two different roads and we got to find where those paths merge. That's what I think about in conflict. What about you? What comes to mind when you think about conflict?
There's a quote that I use on every slide when I talk about conflict resolution. It's when I define conflict, it's, when people have needs that aren't being met. And conflict usually happens when two people care about something,
Hmm.
right? And we might just have different needs. I may need this, you may need this at the same time, and we're not quite sure how we're going to get it. And we're afraid to address it, or we charge right head in and say, I need this more than you, and I don't care how you feel, and all those different things. And so it's really an important aspect to know that, like you mentioned, conflict is not combat. Conflict happens when two people have differing opinions on needs. When we
Hmm.
need to achieve something, do we have different roads to get there? When we have different needs of material, who has more, who needs more? It really is a disagreement that doesn't always have to be hostile. It doesn't always have to be
Right.
a fight. We don't have to have animosity. Healthy conflict is conflict can be healthy, and it really can make a difference in how people communicate. It's one of those things that people talk about when they talk about the pillars of teams, right? Trust is something that is really important, and if you can trust people, then you can manage conflict. And if you can manage conflict, then you can be more committed and accountable to each other, which improves results of not just productivity, but also the way that we interact with each other, right? And our enjoyment of what we do and who we do it with. So being able to manage that conflict effectively is so important because, I'm sure you've seen situations where conflict has really ruined the dynamic of an organization and really cut into the effectiveness they have with clients, right? Do you have an example of that?
Oh, oh boy, do I.
One example, Tiff.
Oh, well, so I can give you one example, and I will keep the names anonymous to
Yes.
just so I will be very transparent here to say I have not always had a great way of dealing with conflict. Conflict resolution is not something like in my family that we really grew up with, the forefront of our minds of how to deal with conflict in a healthy way.
You were born into
You know,
darkness. You were born into darkness.
yes, listen, I'm from the 1900s, right? And so, like, the way that like we have dealt with conflict, at least in my generation, was if you say something I don't like or I have a need that you don't meet, like meet me at the dumpster at 3 o'clock. We had Aquanet and a lighter ready to burn you down. And so what I found is that that's frowned upon, by the way, in every HR department everywhere. Like I can't be like, I don't, I don't like the way you tone that email. Meet me at the dumpster at 3 o'clock. Like that. That's not normal, healthy, or acceptable. So, um, I had to really learn about conflict, and I went to a class. This is. I wish I remember who the instructor was. Thank you, whoever this instructor was. I'll get to my story, I promise. But he had said with conflict, you have like three choices. You change it, you live with it, or you leave it. And I really kind of abide by that nowadays. Like if there's a conflict, can I change it? Can I have a conversation? Can I take accountability for something? Do I live with it? Meaning like I accept what it is and I like surrender to it. Basically, I don't hold a grudge. So it is what it is, and I can live with it. Or if I can't do either of those things, I have to leave it. There's no other option. So the conflict that I came that I actually did change it eventually, but I worked in a very toxic office in a county that shall remain unnamed, and we got a new person in the office, and her name will be withheld for her safety, um, for her privacy. Let's say that for her privacy. And she came to the office, and like one of the very first days that she was there, she got put on the special project. We had a unit meeting. There was like 40 of us, 40 in this department. And again, she's brand new. She's like a day old in this office. And she made a comment like, well, we wouldn't have the problems we have here if you all were better at customer service. And when I tell you, like, the 40 of us banded together, like, what? And so this one super, super sweet lady that worked there, she was like the type that would give you a hug and say, hey, baby, and give you a kiss every morning. Like, she was like the most nurturing, loving person in our office, was like, you don't even go here. Like, when little Miss Carmen took her earrings off, I thought, oh crap, it's about to go down. Well, what happened, that conflict was now nobody in the office liked her, and she was like a very integral part of like our day-to-day duties. Like, she was on the special project, we had to deal with her, and nobody would. So we would hear her walking down the hallway, and we would take off from our desks, and we like communicated via post-its back and forth because nobody would talk to her. We iced her out for 3 months. For 3 months nobody talked to her. And I heard her one day, this is where I had to have the shift, tell another department, because we were all in rows. She's talking to another department in the next row, and she says, wow, this office isn't very nice. And I was like, we are nice, just not to you. Like, we're just not nice to you. So I felt really bad about that. My humanity kicked in, because I was dealing with it as like, forget this lady, who does she think she is, coming in judging us? Like, you
Yeah.
you don't even go here, so who are you to tell us what we do or don't do? um but I went and I invited her to lunch, and it was just so funny because I was like, hey, do you want to go to lunch today? She's like, why? Now, mind you, we've been icing her out for 3 months. I
Right.
would have been terrified. But I told her, I just want to admit, I don't know you very well, and you don't know me either, and I just want to fix that. Like, I feel like I haven't ever given you a chance, and I want to try to correct that. And so she did. She came to lunch. We had a great conversation. Um, and we were able to work together. Were we best friends? Absolutely not. She still had a way about her that wasn't very pleasant. But we started inviting her to the potlucks. She got invited to the potlucks. And I mean, it kind of like evened out, but for 3 months, we didn't get like a fundamental part of our job done effectively because we just wouldn't talk to each other.
Yeah.
So that's like one example. I have many more. How much time do we have on this podcast? But it
Yeah.
just it overwhelms.
Yeah.
It overwhelms.
No, I've seen it happen in a human service setting where, me in one unit and the other unit, and we shared clients, wouldn't talk to each other, wouldn't answer the phone when somebody rang from the other side of the building and immediately went to voicemail. So you could tell it didn't ring 4 times. It just went boom straight to voicemail.
Right.
So someone actually literally had to push a button, not let it ring out. So it's not like they weren't at their desk. You know what I mean? And so,
Hmm.
and that happened all the time. And emails weren't answered as timely as we like. So what do you think we did? Oh, well, if they're going to do that to us, then, you know,
Right.
right?
Right.
Where's my virtual Aquanet, right? So just
Yeah.
we fought fire with
Per
fire
my last email.
from
Per
my
my
last email.
last email.
Absolutely. But just think about how that affects clients, how it affects
Right.
the dynamic, not just between those units who don't necessarily get along, but especially the work that we have to do to be able to support our end users, which are in human services, the most vulnerable people in our communities.
Hmm.
And yet we hold them to a standard of accountability and performance and honoring agreements when we as an organization have a hard time being accountable to each other and honoring our agreements that we're supposed to have.
Hmm.
That I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
if people are traveling, where I was, it was remote. I mean, there was 17 miles and 25 miles, 30 miles, and 10 miles from the nearest cities. And if a client was taking a bus, there was three buses a day coming from one city to another, and they get there, and then they have a question for their other worker, and you can't get them on the phone because they see it's your prefix. Well, then what does that client have to do when if something, well, come back to the office, just have them sign it. Okay, well, now they have to get back on that bus, right? And I tell the story, it's a lot longer. It'll take up more than a half an hour, trust me. But it's just one of those things where it really affects the people that we work with and the people that we work for if we're not careful. And the problem is when we don't know each other, when we don't communicate, we don't know each other. When we don't know each other, we're not necessarily quite sure what that other person's doing. Have you ever heard that, Tiff? I don't know about them, but they don't work as hard as us, right?
Right. Oh
Or
yeah.
they must have it
Oh yeah.
easy or whatever. These misinterpretations of what people are doing just based off of I don't know that person because I haven't engaged with them because I don't want to because I don't want to start something. And a lot of times it's just I don't know
Yeah.
that other person, right? So there's
I
email
call that the
escalations.
must be nice. I call that the must be nice syndrome. Like, oh,
Boom.
must be nice. Must
Yeah.
be nice that they're doing this and they're doing that. But um it just distracts. Like I honestly, just my own experience. I don't have any like research on this except for my own anecdotal evidence. That most of the time the conflict in the workplace has very little to do with the public. It has very little to do with working with clients. It's almost always behind the scenes. It's almost always coworker to coworker, staff supervisor, supervisor to manager, manager to everybody. That's where the conflict is, and it's a for me, it's the unspoken, right? It's the unspoken things or the unheard. So if I'm telling you, like, Carl, you're my supervisor, which good luck to you, Godspeed on that. If you're well, you have been my super. Well, you've kind of been my supervisor. Okay. Well, anyways, um, uh, you didn't run me though, okay? No, I'm just joking. But if you're my supervisor and I'm telling you like Carl, the way that I work best is with a lot of autonomy. So if you can give me like what outcomes you're hoping for and give me the opportunity to use my expertise and my knowledge to get this done, I would really that's how I thrive. And Carl says, oh, okay, cool. Here, let me micromanage every detail of your day. Like it's not unspoken, it's just unheard, right? You're not hearing what I'm saying, you're not listening because you've already decided maybe that your way is better. And so if I am a person who um, is very maybe we're going to use the TKI words today since that's our model. If I'm a person who's very competing and I'm very assertive and I'm not very cooperative, I may say, forget you and your list. I'm going to do it my way. Try to stop me. Sometimes at my own demise. And if you are a person who maybe falls in a different part, and I'm going to say, Carl, you might be more in the accommodating of a realm as an S, you might be an accommodator. I might say, well, I'm going to do it my way. And even if you know that it's not in my best interest, you might say, okay, whatever you want to do, Tiff, run wild, as a way of kind of avoiding that really in-depth discussion or maybe potentially challenging discussion. So, um, different styles deal with conflict in different ways. Number one, I always think you have to just acknowledge that it exists and it's not the end of the world. There are two, I don't want to go too deep into this, but there are like different types of conflict at work, and they are not the same. And so the one I think of, there's task conflict, like we have a disagreement about like the process or the goal or how the work should be done. That usually is fairly low risk, and it's very, very, very fruitful when we have discussions, like healthy discussions around conflict in task. Um, Very good for the workplace. What's most damaging is relationship conflict, where I just don't like who you are. I don't like the way you breathe. How dare you be a human being in my existence? And that one is when it becomes personal. That one's harder to come across. What I find really fascinating is that a lot of to avoid the task conflict, we make it relational, and that's always harder to recover from. And so, how do we keep it focused on the work and not about each other? But that takes some trust. We got to get to know each other. You're muted. You're muted. You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, my boss is in the corner. We're yapping at the UPS guys, so apologies. But
It's okay.
what you're elevating right there is, and you mentioned it most of the time, doesn't have to do with the public. And how often does it not even necessarily have to do with the person we have the conflict with? Remember, we talk a lot
Right.
about the drama triangle, and we'll go back over that again, because it's such an important thing to think about it. But how often do we perceive being victimized, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
such an important thing, that where we feel like if we don't know this person, our brain isn't comfortable with this, doesn't understand their personality, their communication style. We want to predict behavior, and if we can't predict behavior, then sometimes we're hesitant to engage with that person. So that can be an issue. Conflict avoidance, when we don't want to have that
Mm-hmm.
difficult conversation because we don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, let alone what they're going to say to us. We don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, or we don't want
Mm-hmm.
to open up a can of worms, right? And that's conflict that we create. You know what, how else we create things? Hey, do you have a second? Come talk to me in my office, without providing context, like we talked about CBIA plus F, right, in the last episode, right? And so we create those conflicts in people's brains sometimes by not providing enough information, because when we don't have information, our brain will make it up, and it usually starts with
Yeah.
the worst to protect us, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of conflict that we perceive starts with us. And yeah, we'll have some
Yeah.
people that'll just come at us, you know, in a crazy way. And we can recognize those folks, and those folks that we can deal with, and where we have different ways of dealing
Mm-hmm.
with it. But how often is a conflict blown up out of proportion in our head, that when we interact with somebody, oh wow, they're not that bad. Or, I'm sure you've had that before. It's, if when I first met you, I didn't like you very much, or I thought you were
I've never
scary,
heard
or
that.
whatever else. Yeah, sure. I have, right. So, but just those things that we blow up in our heads. I mean, we can cause conflict unintentionally and don't even mean to create it, but we
Mm-hmm.
can exacerbate it. And so Tiff was mentioning, competing, right? And that's part of the TKI model, that, is there. And just want to share it real quick and just show you where the components of the model, right? So the TK model, the Thomas-Kilmann instrument, was created by two researchers. One of them is Ralph Kilman, who is still very active on LinkedIn, and they talked about the different aspects of conflict, the different behaviors and the ways that we manage conflict. And they have to do with the two axes that you see there on the screen, right? So the concern for the issue and the concern for the relationship, right? And it depends on, how important things are for you, or how not important they are for you. So competing is when the the need is so important, and your need to win and to be right and to get what you need to get completely overrides your concern for that relationship. So I need what I need, and I'm not really worried about how that other person feels. In fact, if they just give up, that'd be easier for me, right? So how do I dominate that situation? How do I sometimes be super assertive, almost aggressive, and sometimes overly aggressive, and those things like that, to put people in their place? And then collaborating is where, yeah, I have a need to be able to get what I need, but also I'm thinking about that other person that I'm engaged with, and I want them to be able to get what they need as well, so we can continue to work together. So how do we address our needs together? How do we collaborate? How do we meet to be able to identify what is a win-win situation? Then you have avoiding, which is, I don't really need this, and I really don't want to engage with you. Or, if the relationship is a little rocky, or you seem super aggressive, or it's not really important to me, so I don't care. Have what you want. We don't need to build a relationship in this sense. You can just have it. I'd rather just demur and stay away from it. I don't want to go there. Then you have accommodating, which is, I may not necessarily need something at the moment, but I know that you do. And so how can I help you get that, with sometimes the hope that you'll remember me when I need something as well, right? That's that accommodating piece. I really like being accommodating, especially when I know somebody else is mindful and appreciative of me being accommodating so that they will accommodate me when I need to. It doesn't always happen and you learn your lessons, right? But that's definitely important. Then compromising is when you can't come to a conclusion. So you just split the apple in half. And if it's an apple, is every apple symmetrical? In fact, I mean, very rarely is an apple symmetrical, right? You cut an apple straight down the middle, you end up getting more seeds or more meat or whatever else it is. No one ever really truly gets exactly what it is they want. And so it's almost the opposite of collaboration when it's kind of lose-lose. We leave thinking, okay, how can we do this? But if we come to some type of equitable solution, compromising can work. So those are the five dynamics of conflict that we have in us, right? Thomas-Kilmann mentioned all five of those exist within us, but we tend to utilize one or two of them more than the others based off of our personality or how we've learned to communicate. Those things like that. So, which ones do you think you lean towards the most, Tiff?
I want to. I'm very assertive. And so competing and collaborating are my top two for sure, because I'm not one to skirt around the issue. Um, but for me, honestly, it depends. So and I'm going to say it depends on the collaborating versus the competing. And this is like the difference for me. If if I if I'm in collaborating mode, my mindset is my needs are important. It's important for me to get my needs met, but it's equally important for me for you to get your needs met. That's when I'm in collaboration. So here's what I need. What do you need? Let's find a solution that works for both of us. So I like that. Collaborating is the and. Okay, the and. In competing, it's I want my needs to be met. I could care less if your needs get met. I want my needs met at the expense of yours. So it's what I want. And I don't really care what you want. Just worry about yourself. So when I get into competing mode, I almost always start from collaboration. And if the other person is also in collaboration, then we're good, right? But if I'm in collaboration mode and you're like, no, I don't care what you want, now I'm digging my heels in. Now we're gonna fight a battle. And I sometimes wish I wasn't like that because I can go back to collaborating. If the other party says, wait, okay, look, I want us both to get the same thing, cool, let's do that. But if you were like, no, 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 I say, hold my beer. I'll get you to yes, or I'm gonna get what I want. I'm gonna get what I want. So
And
um yeah.
and I'm almost the opposite, right? My natural is, like I said, to accommodate, but at the same time, if I don't really know that person, I will lean towards avoiding. I will lean towards
Yeah.
avoiding if I'm not careful. I just don't want to deal with it. I don't have the energy. I don't want to hurt this person's feelings. I don't want to have a difficult conversation
Mhm.
with somebody. That person, they're argumentative and they're going to put me in a position where I'm going to, be flustered. If I lean towards that, then on everything, what happens? People start thinking you don't have a voice and it doesn't matter, right? So I will lean towards accommodating, but I will intentionally try to collaborate. It's hard for me to compete, but I will intentionally compete when I need to. The TKI model says there are times and places for each one of these, right? And a lot of people think competing sounds so harsh. And, if you have somebody who always competes, it's very hard for them to find people to collaborate with. Because if we're collaborating, but you're competing, that means you always have to have the last word. You always have to be right. You always have to get what you want. And so, what's the point of us even connecting? I had a boss who used to do that. She used to always get what she wanted and was so proud of it. And, I got us this, I got us that. And then I'd go in and have to work with that department. And they would tell me, your boss is a little harsh. She really ruffled some feathers in here. And yes, she got what she wanted, but, she didn't really leave here with the best reputation. So I was always the one going in to clean up after her. I'm sorry. Don't worry. She didn't mean it like that. She's, I almost, yeah, I had one of those, you don't know what she's like when she's just her, just talking with her team. She really cares. I was falling into that type of relationship. And I recognize, that's something that is not um, workable when we're trying to have a group of people that are connecting all the time. But there is a good time for competing. If you have something where, if you're working with somebody else and you did a lot of work, a lot of research, or you know that you found the right thing and you have that you've made a case, you have an argument. It's like being in court, right? As a lawyer, you need to state a case and you need to hold fast with that case. So you did the legwork, you did that, and the other person, maybe their case isn't as shaky, or maybe their research isn't as well thought out and cited. If you go with that person's thought process or meld their stuff into yours, it's going to lessen the effectiveness of what it is you do. So sometimes you need to stick with your guns. You need to stick with your guns if something's right. You need to stick to your guns if you see an issue that you have to address as a leader, right? Calling people out on things that need to be addressed. It doesn't have to be every piece of work product that people have. Like you said, sometimes I can just let that go because they're doing things. It's just maybe not in my way. That's okay. But if there's policies or regs or behaviors or dynamics that are being affected by somebody's actions, we have to recognize this is important to honor boundaries. um, we can be collaborative with boundaries, but then as a leader, we have to be competitive with boundaries. We have to hold the line with boundaries. There are some things that cannot be crossed. So there's good and bad times to use competing, as long as you're not using it all the time and you're using it in a real way that shows why, and you can state your case and be persuasive in that sense. That's great. But also, collaborating is where I'm sure all of us would like to be, where we're all working together and it's a win-win situation. But the problem is, if you have people that don't want to collaborate with you, it's hard to collaborate with people with by yourself. You can't collaborate by yourself. And if you do, I mean, we have a topic coming up on mental health that we'll address that. But and then also sometimes collaboration doesn't always work when we have a short time frame, when decisions have to be made. Sometimes it's okay, I made this decision. And then afterwards, hey, look, I made this decision. I based it off of this. And so, maybe next time we can figure out what to do in that situation. Sometimes crisis situations or where we have to figure out how to make something, happen. Then we can come back and, go over it again and debrief how that worked and how we can make it work. Right. And sometimes avoiding is okay, right? If somebody is super aggressive or they really need something and they're super excited about it, sometimes, hey, look, it sounds like you know what you need, and that's cool. I'm gonna let you guys, I'm gonna let you have that, right? But we have to be careful about not doing that all the time, because then people don't think that you have a voice, and they just won't even access you. Oh yeah, we won't talk to Tiff anymore because she, the last couple of times she just said whatever you want, do what you want, right? And so she is really not that interested in it. So sometimes if we overuse that, that can be a challenge too.
So I want to jump in real quick because
Yeah.
I was looking up some statistics about avoidance, right? Because this is
Mhm.
when I do a lot of classes around conflict resolution, and most people are incredibly uncomfortable with it, and so they move into silence or violence.
Yeah.
Silence being the avoidance, and violence being like the aggressive, sometimes the competing style. Um, but a recent study showed that 89% of people would rather let conflict escalate instead of addressing it directly.
Yeah.
And so we see this a lot in human services. So I haven't, like maybe Carl's my peer. Instead of talking to Carl directly, I go to my supervisor and I go tell on Carl. So somebody else. So when people say, I don't like conflict, but I'm going to go snitch, it's not necessarily that you're avoiding the conflict, you're delegating it to somebody else. So 9 out of 10 people would rather escalate it than deal with it themselves.
Yeah.
Another interesting statistic here is that almost 56% of people would prioritize harmony over conflict. So that means like more than half of us would rather keep the peace than solve the problem. And this is where like when I think about the idea of this is why I'm assertive, keeping the peace over solving the problem. What happens with a lot of conflict is that people again avoid, and this rubber band, like we don't solve the problem, so this rubber band keeps getting stretched, and then one day it snaps. So now instead of dealing with conflict in a healthy way because my emotional temperature is down, I've already just snapped, and I'm like, Carl, you're a piece of crap and you never did this and you always do that. And now I've dealt with it in a really unhealthy way. And now that's the idea that people get around conflict, is that it's always nasty and ugly. But that's because it's like we didn't deal with it when it was a small issue. We let it fester until it got infected. Ew, that's a gross visual, but it works. But
No,
that's how nasty it can get.
that's the visual I use. It's an open wound, and if we don't treat the open wound, it festers,
Yeah.
right? And
And yeah.
that's the issue. And so, if as a leader, well, yeah, you've been doing this, and this been going on for months. Why didn't you talk to me about it when it first started? You lose your effectiveness and authority as a leader when you don't address issues, not just with that one person. Everybody on the team sees you avoiding what needs to be
Mhm.
dealt with that person. So, how do you think they feel about you as a leader, you as somebody who's advocating for them, that supports them, and you can that can help manage the conflict on your team?
Yeah. So I really like if we really come back down to this, it's like you don't have to love conflict. You're probably not going to. And I know we were talking about this a little bit ago. I think most people catastrophize like what's going to happen on the other end. It's that sense of predictability, right? Going back to the scarf model. There's no certainty in how this person's going to respond to this information. And we always go to like worst case scenario. And I don't know how you are, but I get into like 10 to 15 fake fights in my head while I'm washing my hair in the shower, you know, like what if they said this and what if they said that? And that's it oftentimes doesn't, that's not going to happen. And so where I come in with maybe some hot tips here is like conflict isn't rare, conflict isn't invisible, it's not comfortable, but we have to develop a skill set to be able to navigate it. And so part of that, looking through that lens of emotional intelligence, is that self-awareness. And so for that idea of self-awareness is know, you have to know like what your go-to conflict style is. And so like a good question that you can ask to really like think about, where am I? Really ask yourself when you have a conflict in life, in work or at home, like what's your first instinct? Do you want to push people? Do you want to give in? Do you want to run away? Are you looking to compromise? Are you looking to collaborate? And what's healthy for you? Again, it's a habit. It's a habit, not necessarily a mindset. And so if maybe the style that you identify, excuse me, the style that you identify is not working for you, what's one thing that you could do to maybe do it a bit different? If you're a computer, and that's again, it has its purpose in different situations, but if it's not serving you well, then the question you can ask is like, what do I need to lean into? How can I be more in tune with what the other person needs versus just mine? If I'm a person who avoids, I might really ask like, what am I giving away by avoiding this conversation? Right? What am I reinforcing by avoiding this conversation? People a lot of times if I tell you, hey Carl, this is what you're doing and it bothers me, when I give you that information, chances are you'll adapt. Most people do. Most people are reasonable. So if I'm like, hey, I don't like it when you call me Tiff Dog, if now I don't like it, you probably won't do it anymore. But if I never tell you, how do you change your behavior?
You mean like
Right?
calling you a
How do
rock
we
star?
change your behavior?
Like calling you a
Yeah,
rock
like
star?
everybody very much knows how I feel about that. But you know what? Nobody's also calling me a rock star anymore. So guess what? It works. So it's like I can't be upset about my unmet needs if I'm not expressing my needs to you. I want to, the most generous thing I can do in conflict is give you an opportunity to know where I'm coming from, and then also be willing to hear what you need as well, and then find a way where we can get as close as we can to both of us. It's not always going to be possible, but we want to get to that space where we are really trying to meet each other's needs versus just being on one side or the other. Find that balance.
Expectations are some of the most empathetic things you can do and the most compassionate things you can do for
Mhm.
people. Absolutely. So, yeah. And if anybody's interested in learning more about the TKI, there's plenty of resources online. Like I mentioned, Ralph Kilman with two N's, right? Kilmann. He's on LinkedIn. He has a weekly uh, blog that he puts out for team building and conflict resolution. Also, there's the TKI instrument that's out there that you can take. There's some, online that use a similar algorithm that, maybe aren't as costly, but there is a cost for the actual TKI instrument. But, if you find somebody who's a vendor that's, kind-hearted, maybe, you can take that or whatever else it is, just to learn more about what is your style? What is your go-to? Like I said, what is that style that you might lean towards, right? Introverts tend to be a little more S's and C's on the disc, tend to lean towards the avoiding and accommodating, folks that are D's, more competing, I's collaborating, right? So just recognizing the relationship and communication between those, right? There's a definite connection between TKI and MBTI, right? So there's visuals and models that show those connections based off of your personality types. Just recognize what is your normal that you lean towards. When do I need to be intentional in using those others, as Tiff has mentioned? So, but great hot tips, Tiff, and hopefully everyone's ready to use them. The takeaways. What is your conflict style? When does it tend to show up, and what can you do to be intentional to recognize what is the best use of my conflict brain in that moment?
Yeah.
So,
And I'll
thank
and
you
I'll
very
end with
much.
on this little note. Yeah, I'll end on this little note. If you notice that conflict keeps happening in your workplace, if it's keep happening in your life, it's just not because everybody else is difficult. It's just there's something that hasn't been said. There's a conversation that needs to be had. So I'd like you all to leave on a thought like, what conversation have you been avoiding? And what are you willing to do to lean into that?
Absolutely. And
And
we
yeah,
will
and
lean
that's how
into
we're gonna keep it real.
and
Huh? What was that?
and we're gonna lean into ending this
Yes,
episode. So yeah, think about who you want to have that tough conversation with and just try to be a lover, not a fighter. Right. And until then,
that's right.
I'm Carl,
I'm Tiff.
and let's keep it real. Real
Keep it
nice.
real,
Or real
real
kind.
honest,
Yes,
real
real honest and
honest.
kind. Yeah.